Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our planning committee meeting today. I'm sure that with such lovely weather outside, you're really glad to be in here. As you're aware by now, we only have one substantive item to decide upon, and we'll come to that shortly. But for the benefit of everyone listening, we have a number of procedural matters to deal with, and I will ask the clerk to go through that with us. But before then, have we got any apologies?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor D. Ruff. We also have apologies from Councillor J. Ridgway, who's been substituted by Councillor N. Barker. Thank you, Chair.
Have any other apologies from anyone? No?
None received.
Thank you. Item 2 is declarations of interest. I have to read this, so bear with me. Members are requested to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest and/or other interests not already on their register of interests in any item on the agenda, and to withdraw from the meeting at the appropriate time. Do any members have any interest to declare?
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're moving on to the next part, item 3, minutes of the last meeting, which was held on Tuesday, the 26th of April. Are we happy that that is a correct record? And if so, can I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Armitage. And a seconder? Can I have a seconder? Councillor Jones, thank you. All those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you, Councillor Hancock. The motion is carried. Right. That brings us on to the members of the meeting. We have one application along with the late representations report on it. There are a lot of people who have asked to speak on this application, most of whom are objectors. To ensure that we can manage this effectively, we will take them in groups. At the moment, most of them are in the executive meeting room and have access to the meeting electronically. At the right time, they will be brought into the meeting in groups so they can address the committee and answer any questions. Once all of those in the group have done, they will be asked to leave, and so the next group can be brought in. However, they will still be allowed to follow the meeting again in the executive meeting room. Before we begin, I would like to ask the clerk to explain for the benefit of members, speakers, and those watching the meeting on YouTube how we will deal with the applications.
Thank you, Chair. This is the procedure for considering the application this afternoon. The Chair will introduce the application, then ask the planning officers to refer members to any late comments or updates received since the agenda was issued. The late items agenda supplement has been published on the Council's website, and hard copies have been circulated to you. The planning officers will then give a brief presentation, setting out the application plans and photographs from the site. After this, the Chair will ask for the groups of speakers to be brought into the chamber. Some of the speakers will address the meeting through Zoom. Each of the speakers will have 3 minutes to put forward their views. There will be a reminder given by the clerk when 30 seconds remain. At the end of the speaker's 3 minutes, members of the committee will have an opportunity to ask the speaker questions, if necessary, in order to clarify any of the points which they have made. When we have heard from all the speakers on the application, the Chair will open up the meeting for debate and ultimately for determination by a vote. The votes will be taken by roll call. Once the group of speakers have addressed the committee and answered any questions, then they will be asked to leave the chamber so that the next group can be brought in. Those who've participated by Zoom may continue to view the meeting and will not be allowed to participate further from that point. And as you are aware, this meeting is being live streamed and a recording will be placed on the Council's website. Please note that others may choose to copy it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we now go on to item 4, which is the application that we're being asked to look at this afternoon. It is NED/18/01003/OL, and it's at Killamarsh. It's an outline application with all matters except access reserved for further approval for the erection of 397 dwellings on land southwest of Upperthorpe Road, Killamarsh. It's a major development affecting the public footpath, and brackets amended information at the end of that. So in line with normal practice, I'm going to ask the planning manager and officers to tell us about any late comments reports that have been produced and to give a brief presentation showing any pictures and plans of the site. I will allow the officers to complete the presentation. Consequently, members, could you please reserve any points of order or questions about the process until the end? Thank you. Mr. Kirkham.
Thank you, Chair. Just before we go through the brief presentation we have for members, I just wish to do a brief introduction, if I may, Chair. Firstly, to draw members' attention to the late comments report that was issued yesterday afternoon. There is a single point of clarity, Chair, in that, and it's that the junction referred to in condition 35 regarding traffic signalling should actually be referred to as the Bridge Street to Sheffield Road junction, whereas the roundabout referred to in condition 36 should be the Walford Road, Sheffield Road junction. My apologies, Chair, that I got that the wrong way round. Before I go through the slides, Chair, as I say, I'd like to ask Planning Committee to bear in mind that the vast majority of the site is allocated for residential development in the Council's recently adopted local plan. The residual area, Chair, within the Greenbelt is proposed to be used for the management of surface water runoff, and the indicative layout that we'll come to in a second shows a series of attenuation ponds in that area. And members, I'm sure, will be aware that engineering works in the Greenbelt are not inappropriate development, providing they preserve openness and don't conflict with Greenbelt purposes. Officers, Chair, have considered matters of design and the provision of open space and concluded these matters can be controlled adequately at the reserved matters application stage, and as appropriate, conditions are recommended. There's been much discussion about the impact of the development on highway safety, Chair, and members will have noted that. And the Highway Authority's statutory consultees have concluded that the application is in principle acceptable, subject to necessary mitigation and conditions. And again, that's as set out in the report, Chair. Members will note also that flooding has been raised in representations, but members in that instance will need to weigh heavily in the balance the comments of the lead local flood authority, who have not raised any objection to the scheme. Infrastructure, again, Chair, has and I'm sure will be raised with members. In this regard, the applicant is prepared to meet all the requests made of them in respect of increasing and improving infrastructure, save the sole exception regarding the requested upgrade to the Quayside network. And again, Chair, that's mentioned in the officer report. Consultees in respect of land contamination, land stability, drainage, ecology and archaeology have all raised no objections subject to necessary conditions, and in the respect of ecology, some off-site mitigation. The on-site footpath, Chair, will not be extinguished, but will be incorporated into any new housing layout. So in conclusion, Chair, members will be aware that the committee will need to determine the application this afternoon in accordance with your development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Officers, Chair, have concluded that the application is in conformity with the development plan and there are no other material considerations that indicate otherwise, and hence our recommendation that the application be approved this afternoon. I'm just asked for Alice's help in respect to the presentation. Chair, just as a few slides that we'll go through on the screen. Thank you, Alice. Just if you move on a couple, please. Thank you. This slide, Chair, is in the application pack. It shows the application site in the yellowish colour, and the red line is the district boundary to the south and southeast. You can see on the east side of the site, Upperthorpe Road, and then on the left-hand side of the screen is Green Lane. Reference is made in the report, Chair, to the accesses that were performed on those two roads. Thanks, Alice. This is the indicative layout that's been submitted with the application. It is only indicative, Chair, and so it will carry limited weight, but in terms of the issue regarding the land drainage and the attenuation ponds, you can see those on the southern and southwestern boundaries of the site. specific reference is made in the committee report to those, and conditions as recommended make reference to them and the area that they cover. And next slide, Alice, helps in just outlining where the allocation in the local plan is. And that's KL1, that's the area hashed brown. You can just see the application site. There's a portion of it to the south and a small portion to the very southeast of the application site that lies outside the allocation. Those areas remain in greenbelt. And again, the report goes into some detail about those issues. Thank you, Alice. And then just 3 photographs, Chair, just as a aide-memoire to the site visit we had yesterday. These are taken from the south of the site. The valley in the foreground of the slide is the valley where the attenuation ponds would generally be located, and the site proper then extends to the north away from there. So you can see where the 2 fields have got horses in. That's the application site, with the area in the immediate foreground of the slide fall outside the application site. And then just keep going, Alice, please. The panning ground to the west, again, the application site in the middle of the slide with the houses on Green Lane in the mid-distance. And then again, Alice, just panning round again further to the west. You can then see the Westhorpe Industrial Estate in the middle of the trees, and the application site to the right of there. Again, where you see the road in the middle right of the photograph, that is the valley that would generally be taken over by the attenuation ponds. And I think that's the end of the slides, Alice. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Armitage. I'll repeat that. I would now like the first group of speakers to address the committee. I think they're already here, aren't they? They are. They are indeed. Can I just say that we have around 20 speakers this afternoon. I would suggest to them that we don't have the same argument repeated 20 times, and that you bring points up which, you know, don't repeat what has already been said. That will aid the process, I think. Our first speaker is Lee Rowley MP, who I can see is on Zoom. Welcome to the meeting, Mr. Rowley. You have 3 minutes to speak, and you will be told when 2.5 minutes have expired, so you can have your 30 seconds to round up. Can you confirm that this is your name and that you understand the process?
I do, and thank you.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for allowing me to come today. I don't usually come to planning committees. I respect the reality that the decisions are made by councillors, quite rightly, but this is such an important issue for the village of Killamarsh, and I've received so significant number of representations that I wanted to make an exception in this instance. This is an important, a difficult and a controversial application. You're going to hear that, and you can see that from the volume of responses and the number of residents who are with you today. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. I have commitments in the house today. I didn't agree with this being in the local plan in the first place, but that argument has passed. And so the question remains now is as to whether the inspector who passed the local plan did so with the right information to put it in, and therefore whether this planning application should go ahead. We all accept that this will have a significant and substantial impact, and I have the greatest of respect for officers in terms of the decision, the proposed decision which they have put before you, but I would like to put 4 things in front of you which I hope will allow you to reject this application. The first one is in paragraph 7.8 to 7.13, and that is about the number of houses and density. This application exceeds the number of houses which are in the local plan, as the report states. It exceeds the intentional density, and it exceeds the gross density. And I think it is important that all of those are acknowledged, and my view is that this proposal is therefore too big for this piece of land and should be rejected on that basis. I know that the applicant believes that the design review process has mitigated that potential issue, but ultimately it is your decision. And the North East Derbyshire District Council have got statements about the number of houses and the density, and these are exceeded. So I would humbly suggest to you that you might reject it on that basis. Secondly, paragraph 7.1 about the attenuation ponds which are in Greenbelt. There was a reason that this proposal, in the local plan, a specific element of Greenbelt was taken out. It wasn't taken out so that further bits of this application could then be added into the Greenbelt nearby, even if they weren't physically houses. And we have an application here where the density is higher than than your council usually accepts, and they're allowing that density.
30 seconds remaining.
By putting attenuation ponds elsewhere, and I would suggest you reject it on that basis. I would also, I disagree with the highways comments. I wish that highways would take more account of cumulative impacts on infrastructure and highways. And then fourthly, the suitability of this land. The environmental health comments say that can be dealt with in terms of contamination in the reserve matters or elsewhere, but your policy SD14 suggests that you should have confidence about the suitability of land, and I don't think this application gives it to you. I would
That's
suggest
time, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowley. All right, do any members have any questions for the speaker? No, thank you very much. Right, we'll move on to the next speaker, which is Stephen Clough. Is Councillor Clough here? Oh, thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. I'm representing as District Councillor and Chair of Killamarsh Parish Council, and these are the reasons why I believe this should be turned down. The Court Board dated 14th of the 1st, 22 objects to this application because the applicant has not demonstrated that the application is a safe and stable site in accordance with paragraphs 183 to 184 of the NPPF. The county archaeologist objects to this application dated 15th of the 12th, 21 due to its non-compliance with the NPPF paragraph 194, and it does not meet the heritage information requirement. This means losing archaeological features representing potential medieval and prehistoric activity on site. Derbyshire Police design out crime. Officers' comments dated 28th of the 12th, 21 negatively on the design flaws and increase rather than minimises the opportunities for crime, commenting it is currently unacceptable from a community safety perspective. The Ramblers Association response dated 19th of the 12th, 21 states that the site plan fails to follow national and local government policies in respect of providing access to green space for all, and that the total inadequate design and access statement does not refer to the important role that the site plays in the interconnectivity of the wider footpath network. Derbyshire Wildlife Trust comments 2nd of the 3rd, 22, that an updated assessment of habitat loss using biodiversity metric would help to frame and inform the compensation scheme. Such documents have not been submitted. The Trust also comments that the ecological survey data is now very old and should be updated. The application does not have either an equality assessment or a site-specific environmental impact assessment in respect of the site, despite fulfilling the criteria for both. Evidence of contaminated land gas escapes and immense damage that will be caused to the environment in the locality seems to have been ignored by the developer and officers. This, despite the admission in document dated 30th of the 10th, 18th, this is a significant extension to the settlement of Killamarsh. There is landscape impacts to the highway network and localised amenity impacts. The same document comments, section 1E, that there are not considered to be overriding concerns as regards contaminants and pollutants over and above the development of this scale. The Rogers Lease Environment report on contamination shows this to be wrong. The developer says that all the work can be remediated. Their own expert says this is not the case.
That's time, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clough. Have any members any questions for him? No? Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Alex Platts. And could I just remind you, Councillor Platts, that you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alex Platts, representative for Killamarsh West Ward at District Parish. In terms of drainage and flooding, the application documents refer to drainage being channeled via a culvert to Park Brook. Park Brook floods badly during every rain for prolonged periods, closing the road, passing over it at its lowest point at Spinkhill Road. This road is one of the main arterial routes into and out of Killamarsh from the south and would be well used by occupants of these dwellings as part of the application. Green Lane, an access and egress route from the proposed site, is also subject to flooding during prolonged heavy rain. It doesn't require a 100-year storm or a 40% increase in climate change warming to flood. It's happening now. And in my previous objections, you'll have seen photos around that. And I've personally experienced it. I experienced the floods in November of 2019, which impacted severely the ability to actually access my home in that particular village. So it was significant. All the rainwater emanating from the dwellings on the proposed site will be stored in above ground detention basins and below ground storage tanks before being subsequently diverted to Park Brook, running a few feet below the dip in Spinkhill Road. It's not a major watercourse. It's more a small stream in normal times. A report in 1998 by RGB Mining showed that the company, as part of their efforts to clean up, remediated, improve the site, removed the culvert directing water from the site into Park Brook. This was removed because of a significant increase in iron concentrations between the entrance and the exit of the culvert. RJB reinstated an open watercourse to Park Brook in the belief that this would significantly improve water quality downstream of the site. It did, and there are local wildlife sites now associated with Park Brook. Development plans for the site include the reintroduction of a culvert emptying into Park Brook. Regular flooding does, and will occur on Spinkhill Road, which has become by default a main arterial route, albeit unclassified road, used as a rat run from the M1 junction 30 for Killamarsh. Spinkhill Road as well at this point is also a bus route. The uprooting of the wildflower meadow at this location will have a negative effect on soil stability, a probability supported by the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. They advise that the complex root structures of wildflowers provide significant soil stability, as well as providing habitats and feeding stations for our vitally important pollinators.
30 seconds remain.
The site, if developed, will increase flooding risk at the lowest point of Green Lane and Spinkhill Road, which are currently susceptible to infrequent flooding and closure, although the periods between flooding are reducing, possibly due to climate change. This flooding is not a 100-year event. It's happened 3 times in the past 18 months and will happen again. Development will rob this rural site most of its ability to absorb excess water. The rain will no longer fall onto and be absorbed by open fields. Significant rainfall will then be, because of the topography of the area, will run onto the...
That's time, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Platts. Would you like to remain in your seat for just a moment, Councillor Platts? Thank you. Have any members any questions for Councillor Platts? Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, Councillor Platt. I know you've made reference to the flooding 3 times in the last 18 months. Is it typically a multi-time-a-year event when these roads are flooding?
It is, and particularly worse in winter, coming to sort of autumn winter season, and when the rain falls, it is significant, and the current runoff is not. It's substantial. You know, we're talking several feet of water in depth. Historically, as one of the picture alludes to, as a van being almost covered in it. That's happened on more than one occasion.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you. I was just going to ask, we've got the late comments report with some photos of flooding. Are you the one who submitted the photo?
Yes.
Yes, I thought so. It's got your name here. I just wanted to check. So just for a point of clarification, you've taken several photos of the flooded area. How close to the side is this? I just wanted you to...
Pretty much on the doorstep of it, where the gate is, where you see the water actually flowing out and onto the road. That is pretty much opposite the junction, which is where, as looking at the plan, is where it's intended to have some access and egress.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Any other questions for Councillor Platt? Councillor Rouse.
That was November 2019 for the particular one where you see the depth of the water there. Yes. All of those are 2019. That's to demonstrate the absolute severity of it all.
Sorry, can I remind members to use the microphones when asking questions? Thank you.
It's all right, we could hear you, Councillor Rouse. Any other questions? Councillor Platt. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Caroline Rennick. Can I remind you, Councillor Rennick, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Caroline Rennick, the County Council Member for Eckington Killamarsh, Cabinet Member for Infrastructure and Environment at Derbyshire County Council. Thank you for allowing me to raise my concerns about the application. There are a number of key concerns I have about the scheme, the highways impact of the scheme, the implications of the scheme and the wider need for infrastructure to support this application, the impacts on the flood risk. And I know it says a 1 in 100-year event, but as Alex has just explained, there's 2 or 3 occasions in the last 4 years. Damage to the ecology of the area, and I'm also concerned about the lack of detail and the coal mining risk assessment. However, overall, it's this sort of sheer lack of key information and up-to-date information that concerns me, and the need for a greater depth of understanding that would give comfort to me and residents of Killamarsh for the ability to challenge some of these documents in terms of the application response. And therefore, at this point, I have no doubt that this application should be rejected. Not enough time to give examples, but just to highlight some of my key concerns. The highways impact of the scheme and the transport assessment suggests the proposal would generate about 230 trips during the weekday peak hours. I think this appears to us wholly inadequate, and I'm not sure how this can be identified when the housing types haven't even been specified yet. Some of this data is based on 2011 census data and 2017 traffic survey data and does not take account the significant housing built around the boundaries at Killamarsh. You have to appreciate Killamarsh is bounded around Rotherham, Sheffield and Bolsover. And there's been about 5,000 approved houses over the last few years in this area. I noted in a brochure this morning that halfway just up the road is selling their houses based on the local amenities in Killamarsh. And I'm concerned that officers at DCC, any DCC, have perhaps not accounted for the impact of this additional traffic and the pressure on our highways and infrastructure. And I just wondered why there's not enough reference to the local plans of Rotherham and Bolsover and Sheffield in terms of the housing need. This doesn't include the new Gulliver's Kingdom tourist attraction, which no doubt will gather traction after its opening. I've been raising issues around the road count since becoming the local council member last June around Eckington and Killamarsh, and DCC have acknowledged more investigation is needed. DCC has raised also a number of mitigation proposals to be made subject to condition, and
30 seconds remain.
Personally would have liked to see more detail to these conditions beforehand. On behalf of the hundreds of residents, the objections that I'm aware of and my own concerns, lack of detail of mitigation and the conditions set out, and until we have an updated rethink of the statistics and the assessments provided of the impact on our local highways, I would strongly recommend this planning committee rejects this application. And on a personal note, as a parent of
That's time, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rennick. Members, have you any questions? Councillor Hartshorn and then Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Councillor Rennick. You made reference to 5,000 houses being built in the area. How many of them are in North East?
I haven't got the figures actually on this document, but there's 5,000 of which 3,000 are within 2 miles of the actual site itself. And so you can appreciate the significant impact that will have. My worry is the fact that some of those are actually, majority of those are in Sheffield and Rotherham, is that these haven't been picked up adequately by DCC and NEDCC in terms of the impact. So, for instance, the halfway one I just read, it's the Morrison's halfway planning development there. They very, very cheerfully explain how wonderful amenities they have in Killamarsh. Yet we're talking about a Sheffield Council scheme here that's actually recommending all the amenities of their local neighbour in North East Derbyshire. And I just think that's not being picked up.
Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to ask this, Councillor Rennick, but the obvious person to ask it too, given your portfolio at county, is why is the county's report so wrong? We're being told there's no issues, and yet we've got clear evidence that Councillor Pass has presented that flooding is a significant problem. What is the reason why we're being given wrong information here?
Well, it's my colleague who does the flooding assessment impact, but as my infrastructure role is more pre-development, so I have had those conversations. And for the same reasons, when we actually looked to put some of the Eckington in the local plan, we actually challenged some of the DCC's figures around the number of car journeys. And to be fair, the inspector found in our favour that they were inadequate. So like I say, I've only been in post since June, and I've been raising that to the extent of actually now got it agreed that we do more counting of cars in Eckington and Killamarsh. And as a parent, I've got a child in Spinkhill, a child in Eckington, and I'm at school and I do the whole circular loop coming through Killamarsh. And it's right. Then the roads are narrow. You can only get one car through at a time. And this last 4 weeks, as some of my colleagues will tell you, we've had quite a significant amount of roadworks, and the impact that's had just getting the school traffic around the village and the backing up. To me, I can't imagine that being on a daily basis.
Any other questions for Councillor Rennick? Thank you. The next speaker is Tony Lacey.
So I don't think is in attendance, Chair.
Right. Okay. Well, we then need to get in the next group of speakers, do we?
Yeah. Just in terms of that, then, would members be willing to now actually go to the executive meeting room and watch the remainder of the meeting from there? Would you be able to escort them, Asha?
Thank you for your patience in waiting in the executive room. I hope you've been able to follow the proceedings so far. So the first speaker in this group that have just joined us is Wendy Tinley. You go to the table and the microphone should be switched on, I think. If not, there should be a red light on it. You have 3 minutes. After 2.5 minutes, the clerk will warn you that you've only half a minute left.
Thank you.
Okay, off you go.
We ask you to consider the archaeological aspect of the Westhorpe site, land which may have been farmed by our ancestors from at least the medieval ages. The gradiometer survey report provided by Wessex Archaeology in 2018 suggests the site contains elements not only from medieval and post-medieval years, but likely much earlier in the history of our small town. The clearest example of this is a rectilinear enclosure with internal features, potentially measuring up to 800 square metres, which the county archaeologist has informed me is of particular interest because similar readings have produced findings that date back to the Iron Age. The survey also suggests the presence of a medieval holloway, ring ditch features, a medieval strip field system, along with a ridge and furrow ploughing, providing potential evidence of historic cultivation supporting the settlement of Chinawood's Moresque, the name by which Killamarsh was identified in the Domesday Survey of 1086, a sure indication the settlement predates the Norman conquest of 1066. Planning committee members, you don't need me to tell you that the NPPF recognises heritage assets as an irreplaceable source. Paragraph 5.3.2 in the document Historic Environment Desk-Based Assessment, published again by Wessex Archaeology in 2018, provide a list of works as sources of ground disturbance and excavations. Paragraph 5.3.3 states that list of works has the potential to result in the damage to or loss of any buried archaeological features which may be present within their footprint. This could in turn result in a total or partial loss of significance of these heritage assets. The next paragraph goes on to state that any adverse impact to buried archaeological features would be permanent and irreversible in nature. Continuing with this potential adverse effect could be reduced through appropriate archaeological mitigation. I must emphasise, however, that the risk is reduced, not eliminated, and that loss would be permanent and irreversible. This site is a potentially important time capsule that should be protected till such time when it can be thoroughly examined. Please deny this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Just stay there for a moment. Members, have you got any questions for the speaker? Councillor Liggett.
Yeah, just, you know, you mentioned the hollow way. That isn't where the attenuation ponds are.
I don't believe so.
Because I just noticed there were parallel hedgerows there already. But,
yeah, no, I don't believe so.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Claire Whitworth. Just remind you, you have 3 minutes.
Intrusion into the countryside and footpath issues. The proposed development site is currently open countryside with open fields divided by natural hedgerows, providing habitats for a variety of animals. The site drops 43 metres from the northeast to the southwest, making it clearly visible from Station Road to Spinkhill. The housing line on Upperthorpe Road runs from west to east and is a clear separation line. The proposed development will be a clear and obvious intrusion into the countryside and will appear visually as narrowing the gap between Killamarsh to Spinkhill. The Westhorpe Business Park lies on the opposite side of Green Lane, but it cannot be seen at all from Station Road at Spinkhill. It is completely hidden by trees and shrubbery. The background evidence document to the local plan agrees with this, stating of this site that however, a development would have visual impact because of its prominent setting on the southern edge of Killamarsh and it's sloped downwards towards the southeast. There are 5 public footpaths right of way crossing that site. These give beautiful views towards the distant Derbyshire hills to the south and east. The loss of these will be a loss of a valuable public amenity. These footpaths through through a lovely country area were quite literally a lifesaver during the 2 years of the COVID pandemic. It was particularly important during lockdown requirements, allowing exercise with social distancing, protecting both their exercise and mental needs. These rights of way allowed people to walk in a quiet, unspoilt country area full of wildlife, wildflowers, and where many species were able to make a safe habitat. These fields are still used daily by many walkers and dog walkers. The indicative site intends to change the routes of the public rights of way so that they pass along streets without any views of the Derbyshire scenery. And the Derbyshire Design Outcrime Officer suggests that the proposed development designs in opportunities for crime rather than designing them out. Both sets of comments appear to have been ignored by the developer, which appears to contravene policy SDC 12. These are material planning considerations.
30 seconds remain.
And I ask you strongly to deny this application.
Thank you. Have any members any questions for the speaker? No? Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kevin Wood. Thank you. Thank you. Off you go. Framework travel plan. I object to this application because of the very high probability of increased traffic generation and decreased air quality. This totally impractical proposal, which I believe contravenes a number of policies or parts thereof, SS1, SDC 12, ID2, ID3 and ID4, making this a material planning consideration. Incredible claims in the plan include its close proximity to the village centre with local facilities and services, and within acceptable walking distance of amenities and facilities, a wide range can be reached with a 2-kilometre walk. On a map, a 2-kilometre walk for many doesn't seem immense. However, the walk back is all uphill, the majority being 1 in 10. This would also preclude commuting and shopping by pedal cycle. There are 44 services or retail businesses in the centre, 69% being hair and beauty or fast food takeaway outlets, so only 31% are for remaining facilities. Therefore, many services and necessities need to be sourced outside the village, incurring travel to adjacent towns or primarily Crystal Peak Shopping Centre. The only direct service from site to Crystal Peaks is Monday to Saturday, with only 4 journeys in each direction, all during the off-peak part of the day, using Green Lane bus stops. This is totally unsuitable for commuters and shoppers. The alternative service 80, which has no bus stops adjacent to the site, plus early and late services Monday to Saturday don't go via Crystal Peaks, meaning no bus service after 7 p.m. serving Crystal Peaks Drakehouse, so requiring car journeys. The only Sunday bus service, 80, routes via South Yorkshire townships, avoiding Crystal Peaks. So to get to Crystal Peaks involves bus, tram, foot. Not very easy for some with or without bulky purchases. Officers' report paragraph 7.10 says, in relation to maximise housing densities, and particularly in and around town centres where there is good access to frequent transport services,
30 seconds remain.
Is a total misrepresentation and totally wrong. All this forces residents to take the easier option of car journeys. The design and access statement public transport section had a number of errors in the 2018 version and were carried forward in the 2021 version. I highlighted this to members via letter, so won't repeat it here. If developers can get this so wrong, how can we have faith
That's
in
time,
what
Chair.
they tell us? Thank you. Thank you. Any questions for the speaker from members? Thank you. Thank you. Next speaker is Paul Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Kilmarsh is located in the top right-hand corner of North East Derbyshire. As such, it shares borders with Sheffield City, Rotherham Borough, Bolsover District and Chesterfield Borough Councils, and is very close to Bassetlaw. This is a unique situation in North East Derbyshire, and the location has a significant effect. Evidence within the local plan shows that Kilmarsh has the least amount of green belt, the least amount of green space, the poorest infrastructure, the worst public transport options, and is in the area with the worst air quality amongst the main settlements. Yet it has been selected to have by far the most housing allocation. You've heard from Councillor Rennick about the 5,000 new homes that are being built or that's being built, partially built or planned with planning permission within a few miles of Kilmarsh. More than 3,000 of these are less than 3 miles from the Kilmarsh borders. For example, 1,800 of them are in a settlement in Clown, which is called a garden village, and it has infrastructure, it has a school, and it has an industrial park next door. Another one like this has more than 2,000 homes, a garden village in Worksop. Surely this will lead to a market saturation situation if these 400, almost 400 are built in Kilmarsh. Despite sustainability being the golden thread throughout the planning system, this application is the epitome of unsustainable development, which may seem strange seeing as the inspectors passed it. It fails in all three aspects of sustainability as required by policy SS1 and the NPPF, these being economic, social and environmental. In economic terms, this means providing local jobs that minimise out commuting. The two principal sites are poor examples on which to build a strategy. Westhorpe site is full, with the last site being developed after 11 years of inactivity. Norwood was given a red designation by the investigating experts, not available for 10 to 15 years without significant investment. Other sites in Kilmarsh are judged to be too old, decrepit or full. This means that new residents will have to commute out of the area by car to work because of the significant distance from the facilities of central Kilmarsh that you've just heard. The proposed sustainable public transport plan is unworkable, as Kevin's just explained.
30 seconds
The
remaining.
social aspect means the development would suit the needs of both current and future residents. And you've heard about the removal of the 5 public rights of way. The environmental aspect of sustainability cannot be achieved because of the immense damage that will be caused to the wildlife and ecology of the area, including the loss of protected species and the loss of the wildflower meadow.
Thank you. If you just remain there for a moment. Members, are there any questions for the speaker? No, thank you very much indeed. I think we now have to make way for the next group of speakers.
Thing if the speakers would like to return to the executive meeting room so that the next group can then arrive. Thank you. Well, it's an issue, members. We could do that, but obviously there's the question about the sheer number of people within the room. I mean, we're trying to actually still follow reasonably sort of close to the COVID restriction limits, which this, I think.
No, I don't think we'll be here till 7 o'clock, Councillor Hancock. Certainly I won't. I'm quite happy that the speakers have the facility to know what is going on. So I think having made these arrangements, we'll stick to them. Thank you.
Hi, Nigel.
Yeah, I'm going.
Thank you.
Right, we'll continue. The next speaker is Kevin Bone. Mr. Bone, you have 3 minutes and the clerk will tell you when you have had 2.5.
Thank you.
When you're ready.
I object to this application because of the many hazards inherent in this specific site, some of which have been identified, but potentially others have not yet been discovered due to limited testing. The Coal Authority currently objects to this application. Apart from the obvious noise and disturbance and dangers of disturbing the settled land on this site, nearby residents will be at risk of contaminated homes and gardens during the construction phase and when contaminated materials are removed from the site. They will also be subject to unpleasant smells and remediation work when it's undertaken, dependent on weather conditions while it's been removed. It will be impossible to prevent dirt and dust spreading to currently occupied homes, many of them occupied by young children. The report prepared by Rogers Leask Environmental Limited, RLE, indicates that according to Coal Authority records, there are 6 mine entrances present on the site. Some of these will definitely present a constraint to development, but they are not the only potential hazards on this high-risk mining site. Only one of the 6 known mine entrances has been filled and capped, although whether this accords with today's standards and requirements is not currently known. With regards to the other 5 mine entrances, there was no record of them being received any treatment, detailed knowledge of their present condition, or whether one of them is actually located. The report states the risk to proposed development for recorded mine shafts is high and will provide a constraint to development in these areas. The RLE report states that indication of potential unrecorded old workings in the southwest corner of the site. It also shows that collapsed unrecorded workings within this seam were encountered during the excavation of the surface drift for West Up Colliery in the north of the site.
30 seconds remain.
It is inferred that these workings may underlie other areas of the site. The report continues, unrecorded shallow working in this seam has also likely occurred from the 5 recorded mine shafts in the east of the site. It concludes that the risk of unrecorded workings at shallow depth impacting on the development is considered high. RLE show that the ground conditions.
That's time, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. If you could just stay there a moment. Members, are there any questions for Mr. Bowen? No, thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Matt Evans. Thank you, Mr. Evans. Just remind you have 3 minutes.
The site is situated between two roads, as you know, Upperthorpe Road and Green Lane. Neither of these roads are suitable for the size of the development or the construction thereof. Taking Upperthorpe Road, the proposed entrance is on the crest of a hill, just past a very sharp bend from a 50-mile-an-hour section of road, where the cars are already travelling too fast on that section. A previous application for a development of 20 houses on Fanny Avenue, which is on the opposite side, included an entrance on that same section, but it was deemed too dangerous, so that was removed, and yet the same entrance for development of 400 houses is now proposed. On Green Lane, the entrance is opposite a long row of terraces where residents are forced to park on the road, essentially making the road a single carriageway. The road is on a bend. There's no clear line of sight from either end as to whether there is traffic coming in either direction until you've started to make that journey. Frequent head-to-head meetings of cars resulting in one or more having to reverse back out of the way or hopefully find a space. More often than not, there isn't a space. To put an entrance here with 400 plus cars coming out during rush hour is absolutely diabolical. There's no option to widen the road on this section as there's houses at the top, where the car starts, so that would prevent that. Routes into Killamarsh, it's not only the entrances that are unsuitable, but the rest of Killamarsh road network. But from both entrances into the village, there are numerous sections, again, blockages due to on-street parking because of terraced houses straight onto the road. This causes, again, head-to-head meetings of frequent cars, vans mounting the pavement to get past one another. The traffic into and out of the village along Sheffield Road has been mentioned previously, but it's an absolute nightmare during rush hour. Constant tailbacks all the way to halfway and up towards Rother Valley as well. It's not uncommon. All the amenities in the village, and as been mentioned, is not walkable. It's at the top of a very steep hill. If you haven't been to Killamarsh, if you haven't seen the site, it's ridiculously steep. No one is going from that development is going to walk into the town and walk back. It's impossible with kids, with shopping. So all of those journeys are going to be done by car. The transport assessment included as part of the application is over 5 years old. It suggested that only 13% of traffic from Killamarsh goes out towards Sheffield, which is frankly laughable considering Crystal Peaks, etc., are all out that way. Schools, colleges, supermarkets, etc. It was based on loose census survey data from 2011. Completely vague, completely inaccurate.
30 seconds.
There was some traffic stats done, but again, there was no specifics about it. Doesn't say how many times it was surveyed, what days of the week it was done, how many times it was repeated, what time of the year. Again, all very vague and doesn't paint a great picture about the current state, but again, 5 years old. Final point, just want to say there's been over 400 objections from local residents, not a single one in support of this.
3 minutes, Chair.
Is that it?
Thank you, Mr. Evans. If you just stay there a moment. Members, have you got any questions for the Speaker? Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Just one, because obviously we've seen like the Green Lane situation, and there's the comment that about things being widened, but I actually can't see, and I'll apologise because I'm not a resident of Killamarsh, I can't really see where you could widen that to legitimately make an impact without you having a bottleneck as you got further down the road.
You can't widen that section of road. It's impossible. The road is narrow itself. There's already hedgerows. The plan doesn't include any widening, and at the top of the hill there is 2 semi-detached houses at the start of the bottleneck. So there's no way to even widen the road sufficiently, which would allow clear access all the way up. And on both those routes, again, there are numerous sections of terraced houses on the road, which even if you get past that bit, you're then stopped. Again, on bends as well, and the long section coming down from the Nag's Head pub down the hill from the high street. Again, as soon as one goes, the rest go. You're stuck there, and that's a constant source of cars mounting curbs to get past one another. Thank you.
Any other questions for the Speaker? Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Kenneth Warnes.
I don't really need a microphone, but have you got one handy?
Well, we do need you to do the microphone because we have an audio that is going out to members of the public.
I'll have a job on here. Oh, yes, please. Yeah, my name is Kenneth Warnes. I'm a former colliery winder at Westhorpe Colliery for 15 years, and I know the ins and outs. There are 5 colliery seams under the site in question, which are approximately 75 metres deep only. I get these figures because the shaft itself was about 75 metres deep, and we could talk to the people in the pit bottom from the pit top. Once Westhorpe closed, the pumping station, which was at Holbrook, pumping water out, ceased, thereby flooding all these sites. Between Halfway and Eckington, that's where the Morrison site is, there are 3 pipes coming out of the ground, which are methane extractors. They've been there for 30 years, that's for one seam. Going back to the 5 seams under the proposed site, it is difficult to establish the depth, same as I said, but it's approximately 75 metres. Apparently there's a geological fault down the centre of the site with a strata unknown. It needs a geological study. It is well known that significant emissions of methane can still be in all mine workings. These normally are removed from diffuse vents. Have any of these vents been used for this site? I don't know of any. I think British Coal messed up when they filled the shaft. They didn't vent the site at all. So all these 5 workings underground are being flooded, forcing the methane up into the strata. I'm worried when any, if any, building takes place, when they start digging down, it could release methane. A naked light and half a kilometre could go up in flames. That's not a joke, it's serious. Has anyone consulted DEFRA regarding the mine workings? I've looked at all this site and I'm concerned. It's, for anyone information, DEFRA is the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. DEFRA have done significant workings on old mine workings, but it is the uncertainty in methane. With 5 seams under this site with possible faults in the strata, it needs a complete geological study of the old site, and not forgetting other seams, one going under Bridge Street. It all complicates it. In the past, there have been three main pits and 2 others with boundaries of Killamarsh, plus unknown number of bell pits. It affects the old strata, and I'm concerned about all this methane under our village.
That's time, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warnes.
It'll be another 20 minutes, actually.
Members have any questions? Yes, Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. You obviously have a great deal of knowledge of the area. You mentioned the 5 pits, 6. How seams?
Yeah.
How many are these? Are there of what shall I say? Bell mines and unrecorded workings which are already there?
So no.
What? 10 perhaps?
I think the last count was 12, and that's throughout the village. Someone said there were 5 collieries within the village. There was Norwood, Westhorpe, Imore, one at top of Nethermore Lane, and plus 1 other, all workings. And they've all used the strata under the village, and that's what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned about this methane. It wants tests doing before any plans are accepted.
Right. Thank you very much.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Warren, for that. My question is about the response we've had from the Coal Authority, which hasn't changed since it was first submitted in 2018, and it speaks about, and you might have more idea about this, I'm sure, it speaks about on record there being 5 mine shafts there and 4 are being found, and it says that the other has yet to be located, but it's likely to be present. Have you any idea where that 5th one is at all, sir?
Not really. Harry Barnes, the previous MP for North East Derbyshire, did have these details, but I've not been able to contact Harry for some time. But similar to say, has anybody been in touch with DEFRA or anybody about these vents that should be taking this methane out of this land? That's what I'm concerned about, because it's unstable on that area. It's not very deep. If any work's carried out on top, I'm worried about that methane coming up. Similar to say, between Arkway and Eckington, there's 3 parts still going out to the ground after 30 years. It's still pumping out methane. With 5 seams under that area, then it could be a lot worse.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions for the Speaker? Thank you, Mr. Warnes. I have the next speaker as Alan Whitaker on Zoom.
Hello. Shall I just start?
Yeah, do we have visual or is it just audio?
No, we've got visual. I can give you visual.
Have you got your camera on, Mr. Whitaker?
I do.
Right, okay, you have 3 minutes and the clerk will tell you when you've had 2.5.
Thank you.
So off you go.
So the northern part of the site is surrounded by residential dwellings on 3 sides. Building of a large housing estate would have a significant negative effect on existing residents.
Excuse me, Chair, can we just hold for a moment? Is there an issue? Yes, beginning again, Chair, in the circumstances.
Would you like to start again, Mr. Whitaker?
Okay, I'll go now. The northern part of the site is surrounded by residential dwellings on 3 sides. The building of a large housing estate would have a significant negative effect on existing residents through increased greenhouse emissions. This fact was highlighted in the local plan, which placed the site in the amber category and stated it would engender a significant increase in greenhouse gas emissions. The scoping report for sustainability appraisal of the North East Derbyshire core strategy stated this area suffers the worst air pollution in the district. The expansion of the nearby M1 motorway from 6 lanes to 8 will surely have made the situation even worse. This development will only further exacerbate this issue. The Institute of Air Quality Management guidance states that an air quality assessment should be undertaken if a development results in an increase of more than 500 daily traffic trips. The transport assessment provided states that there will be an increase of 2,000 daily trips, which is 4 times this threshold limit. Additionally, this development would exceed the Institute of Air Quality Management screening criteria for assessment of dust impact during the construction phase due to the very close proximity of residential dwellings to the site boundary. A full site-specific air quality assessment, including detailed dispersion modelling of traffic impacts, should be submitted in order to assess the potential risk to existing residents during both the construction and the operational phases of the development. This would be another cost to the developer, in addition to the very significant known remediation costs, which would of course impact upon viability. Neither an air quality assessment nor a site-specific environmental impact assessment has been provided. The environmental impact assessment regulations state that screening should be undertaken when a development exceeds 150 dwellings over 5 hectares. This development is for 397 dwellings over 17 hectares. Initial screening was undertaken by the planning officer in 2018. However, since this assessment, various site investigations have been carried out, which show the actual site conditions to be very different. 6 mine entrances have been located, which will need remediation, generating significant dust pollution. Significant volumes of highly contaminated land has been identified, containing carcinogenic compounds, and all this earth will need to be removed from site and replaced with sound earth, generating significant dust pollution, some of which will be particularly hazardous to health. Mine gases have been identified, and any works undertaken will disturb and release these gases, which would have significant detrimental impacts on human health and the environment. The environmental damage will be immense, with the removal of large wildflower meadows and ancient hedgerows, and this will exacerbate the current flood risk to the 2 adjacent roads, as already
30
mentioned.
seconds.
There are 15 resident bird species which are on the RSPB red list of endangered species, which will be severely impacted by the destruction of their habitat. The installation of bird boxes, as proposed by the developer, is no substitute. Air quality and an environmental impact is a material planning consideration, and I request that you refuse this application on this and many other grounds that you've heard.
That's time, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Whittaker. Have any members any questions for Mr. Whittaker? No? Thank you very much. I think we now have the next group of speakers. Just bear with us for a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, members, we now have Mr. Brian Clamp to speak. You'd like to sit at the table, Mr. Clamp? Got the microphone on. If it's on, it will have a red light in front of it. So if you press the button.
Yes, we have two red lights.
Mr. Clamp, you have 3 minutes and the clerk will warn you when you've had 2.5.
Thank you.
Off you go.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, I'm Brian Clamp, a resident of Killamarsh and also a member of the Killamarsh Parish Council.
In my initial objections, along with strained amenities, there is the terrible bus service, which we are currently fighting to reach a level which will satisfy the needs of the existing population, let alone an increased one. I mentioned the impact on wildlife. My intention now is to emphasize this by referring to global warming and pollution. Much publicity is given to this subject, and as such, I point out green areas are the lungs of our planet and must be preserved and protected to comply with current legislation regarding reducing pollution. Therefore, I request that this planning application must be rejected, denied, or refused, whatever is the correct terminology, to retain and protect the green space. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Clamp. Any members have any questions for Mr. Clamp? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr. Stephen Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I do not profess to have any specific expertise, but I hope members have taken the time to read my full objections, which I did send by email previously. And I apologise if I repeat stuff that's already been done, but these are my views. Policy SD4 and the MPPF promote and require the protection and enhancement of all sites of biogeodiversity value, together with sites providing habitats for priority and protected species, of which this site has been recorded as having many listed, as mentioned by other objectors. The report by Access Ecology states that, and I quote, "There is no mitigation for habitat loss, and the overall loss of the habitat of breeding birds cannot be mitigated." The biodiversity net gain assessment states that under the proposed development, an uplift in biodiversity is not currently achievable for habitats within the site. Manor Road used to be lined with trees on either side of the road. Now there is just one left, and if we want to walk among trees, we have to go across to Westhorpe Fields to enjoy some open acres with views and trees. Are we now to be faced with several years of noise, dust, pollution and muddy roads and a severe reduction in our desperately needed green space? The North East Derbyshire Local Plan 2014 to 2034, Policy ID8, Greenways and Public Rights of Way, states that proposals would result in the loss of, proposals that would result in the loss of or deterioration in the quality of the existing public rights of ways will not be permitted unless equivalent alternative provision is made. New routes should be direct, convenient and attractive. Rather than a pleasant walk across a natural landscape, residents will be faced with yet more tarmac and pavement. The footpath currently linking Upperthorpe Road to Green Lane will be replaced by a tree-lined road. Roads are extremely hazardous for hedgehogs. Gardens can be very beneficial to the hogs, but only if access between them is made available. Now more than ever, before the natural world is under pressure, and in Killamarsh we have precious little green space to exercise. This large development will have a huge impact on local amenities. Despite the expressed intention that people from here will walk, cycle or use public transport to visit the village centre, the reality is due to its location at the top of a steep hill.
30 seconds.
There will be more cars on the road, thus contributing to air pollution and an increase in carbon footprints. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Have any members any questions for Mr. Thompson? Thank you. The next speaker is Chris Curzon. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Curzon.
Good afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to start off with a question. How many of this committee have actually read the full application in full? If not, it's one man's decision, who in my opinion is misleading this committee. First of all, there are 5 major shafts, one of which hasn't been found, as well as footrolls, bell pits and other workings.
There is also a major fault line running through this site, which when groundworks take place could fracture and cause the emission of methane and CO2 gas. The 5 major shafts have been recommended by surveyors not to be built upon or within 5 metres of the shaft centre. The missing shaft, of which the area is known, is currently would have 2 properties and a road above it. The technical report states that 2/3 of this land is unstable, meaning 300 properties would need stabilising with piles and grouting to a minimum depth of 25 metres. This will involve thousands of tonnes of concrete, of which concrete, as we all know, is a major producer of CO2 gas. This indirectly clearly opposes the council's social value commitment, the carbon footprint. Another example is the proposed movement of the public footpath that runs along the boundary of the existing properties on Upthorpe Road. Now, this public footpath has never ever run through the centre of the field and has always run along the boundary of the said dwellings across to the adjacent footpath, meaning on the perimeter of this development. 3 existing properties have gateways and giving access to this path. The right of access clearly states that if a private dwelling has access to a public footpath for more than 20 years, it cannot be moved without the express permission of the people it affects. If the council do attempt to move this public footpath, if permission is given, this matter will be going to court. Haworth Estates have shown little or no consideration whatsoever to the existing residents. 11 years ago, I met with a former employee, Adam Murray, who said that should this development go ahead, they would work with the community to please both sides. Sadly, all I see is Haworth Estates trying to railroad their plan through. Now,
30 seconds.
The plan says 330. 397 is nowhere near that figure. But it's ironically the same number I heard 11 years ago. Now, in my opinion, as a builder with 39 years experience, this site is completely unsuitable for house building. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Curzon. Any questions from members? No, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And now we have Mr. Rod Webster.
Not
He's
here,
not
Chair.
here. Okay. Right, so that completes that 4th group. Could we now bring in the 5th, please?
Existing speakers now leave and go to the executive meeting room to watch the remainder of the committee's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your patience. And the next speaker is Carol Lacey. Is she here? No? In that case, is Mr. David, I apologise if I pronounce this incorrectly, Garona?
Near enough. Thank you.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes and the clerk will tell you when you've had 2.5 when you're ready.
Right, thank you, councillors, for letting me speak. I would like to speak about the potential 600 to 800 new pupils that will be taking up seats already in already oversubscribed classrooms. I am aware that there is no proviso in the plans to build any extensions to these schools or any schools as is. With the very fast rise of autism, ADHD, and the mental health of many children in this country, surely council should be cutting classroom sizes, not increasing them. We should be looking at like 1-to-1 teaching, not 40-to-1. It's impossible for teachers to be thorough with children's teaching with the very large capacities in the classrooms at these schools already. Secondly, the doctors. My other concern, as you are probably aware of the situation in Killamarsh with the doctors, it is very hard to get an appointment with a doctor now. So with an extra 400 adults and possibly 800 infants, toddlers and teenagers, it will be even harder. The problem that is arising mostly now is patients being diagnosed a lot later than they should be. This is leading to severe worsening of symptoms in patients. Then they're having to be referred to hospital, burdening the already overrun hospitals. My third concern is crime in Killamarsh. 400 houses, there's 400 houses to burgle, obviously. A possible 600 to 800 cars to steal, which we have a lot of crime in Killamarsh, which is same everywhere, I suppose. This will then in turn red flag the postcodes again. So all Killamarsh will be paying more houses and car insurance. Then in turn, council tax will go up for everyone in Killamarsh, not just for the 400 houses. Also, climate change. I always thought that council were on the side of saving the planet from climate change. But if there's an extra 400 gas boilers, 600 to 800 cars blowing carbon monoxide all over Killamarsh, it will be soon time to wear masks for the fumes, not just for the COVID. To build on this land and the lungs of Killamarsh will be badly diminished. In this case, I advise, I would like
30 seconds.
In this case, I would like to plead for the councillors to have common sense, even if it's just for the children's education. That is about the end of that, I think. Thank you, councillors, for listening.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Foster and then Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I asked you a question about, you mentioned doctors earlier. So it's a question around that. I've got to be careful how I phrase this because GPs are private businesses, but it is a concern of mine. I'm a county councillor for Killamarsh. Yeah. Although this is how I've heard of it, that there is some concern over the local business, the local GP. That's what I've heard. And whether it's staying there and some difficulty that there is around it. And I read here that we've got the NHS CCG asking for another 190,000 from the 106 payments, and that would be another 993 extra residents to look after them. So my concern is the question is, do you know anything as a resident around this, the medical practices and the future? Thank you, Chair.
Well, I know that there's just 2 full-time doctors there now at the moment. And it's obviously not enough, you know what I mean? It's part-time doctors, obviously. But it's just the situation when you phone up a doctor now, that they refer you to, like, my wife, for example, she's had a bad foot for quite a bit with her knee operation. Her foot's gotten bad, fair enough. She can't put her foot down. She's phoned the doctors and they referred her straight away to the physio in 4 weeks' time. But that to me is wrong, because it could be anything else. It might not be physical, if you know, if it's muscular, or it could be anything, something sinister. You should see them straight away, then refer them. Say, right, it's muscular, refer you, but they don't. Councillor Hall.
Thank you. I was just going to ask about the schools. You talked about the schools and oversubscription. How many schools are they within the vicinity? And
well, there's Norwood Primary, St Giles, Eckington, which most of them go to, I think. There is Wales School, but they, they're just picking children, I think, Wales School. But they are quite a big classroom sizes as well. I think is it 32 in secondary, isn't it, in Killamarsh, and with another 800, possibly 800 children. Where are they going to go if you're not building you're not even building a school, you're not building a doctor's surgery, as the councillor says. There's nothing there. There's no infrastructure now.
What I was meaning within, like you talk about Wales and Eckington, I was meaning within a 2-mile walk, because we hear about school children being encouraged to walk and not driven everywhere. So would you say there are sufficient schools within?
There is a school, but I wouldn't say it's sufficient. No, not for the size of the estate that's going up nowhere. If it's possible, like I said, if they have one child apiece, it's 400 children, isn't it? In the houses. Thank you. Any other questions from members? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I understand that Carol Lacey, who was at the top of my list here, is actually online.
Yes, I'm here.
Have you got a camera on, Mrs. Lacey?
You'll have to forgive me. I'm not very video presentable right now. My point would be the children are being denied further education because of the colleges that surround us in Chesterfield and Sheffield. They can't get there. The buses are inadequate, they are infrequent, and the children either have to go to sixth form at either Westfield, Eckington or Wales Bar, but they are being denied further education to go to college. And I think, considering the 2 years that they've had recently of having either no classes or reduced classes, I think it should be important that any further development should be further away from Killamarsh, because we can't allocate our own children. And my daughter missed out going to college because she couldn't get there by bus. And that is the point I like to make. I want this plan to be refused.
Thank you. Any questions for the speaker? Thank you very much. You may switch your camera off now if you like. Next speaker is Bridie Mahoney.
By Zoom, I believe, Chair.
Good afternoon. Many of the points that I'd like to make have already been excellently made, but I would just like to make some additional points as a resident of Westhorpe Road. Essentially, I would implore you to come to this area before you make a decision, and you will see that the points that have been made about traffic and congestion are real points. We have significant impact for congestion on road safety by the proposed development. The exit onto Green Lane will lead onto Westhorpe Road, which is already a windy residential road that people play on, children play on, people walk down, horses come down to access Boyley Lane onto the Transpennine Trail. The path is very narrow and there's no scope to extend it. If you meet another person coming along the path, you have to step onto the road to pass them. And that's a frequent occurrence, that's daily. I'd also like to say that the exit onto Upperthorpe Road, is very near a bridleway. Now, this route is commonly used by equestrians. I use it daily. It is quite dangerous due to the bend, but with the additional number of cars coming along that road, I'm not sure I would have the confidence to go along it. And I think many others would find it dangerous and potentially unusable. The points with regard to infrastructure have already been made very well, but I would just like to say that as a resident of the bottom of Westhorpe Road at the top of Green Lane, I could not get a bus to anywhere that I would need to go to. It would take far too long. They are very infrequent. And the reality is that I couldn't walk to Killamarsh to go and do my shopping. I would need to take my children, and I couldn't walk back up the hill. I'm a young, fit person, and I could not walk back up that hill with my shopping. And the thought of going along the Transpennine Trail alone is just not feasible for a young person, a young female, or a family. I would also say that driving into Killamarsh, the number of parking spaces in Killamarsh itself are extremely limited. So if you were to go to the supermarket in Killamarsh, then there's already very limited places to park. The traffic is generally backed up all the way up the main road as well. And just lastly, this area is of real importance to us in the local area. It's not just grassy agricultural land, it's where we walk our dogs, it's where we enjoy the fresh air, the countryside, the birdsong, the nature. It's so important to us, and I really hope that you take into consideration the number of objections you've made.
Thank you very much. Any members got any questions for the speaker? No? Thank you. And the final speaker in this section is Eva Thompson. Thank you. You have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm a Killamarsh Parish Councillor. I oppose the development on ecological grounds as it will have detrimental effect on ecology of this area and its surroundings. Living near the area, I can tell you that in the area are birds and mammals, which are identified as being the most threatened and requiring conservation action under the UK Biodiversity Action Plan Red and Amber list. I personally saw many of these, and the reports from residents say that there have been spotted 66 different species of birds and mammals. The applicant is saying bud and bird box in our garden. There are bud boxes on houses, but after 3 years since the development was built, we saw no buds. Before, we saw them nearly every evening. Also, the number of birds dramatically dropped down. A report from Assess Ecology acknowledges significant damage to ecology at the site with habitat loss, disturbance and damage to habitats, fragmentation or isolation of habitats, and disturbance and injury or death to fauna. The removal of several sections of hedgerows, all over 30 years old, and some at least 140 years old. The report says that they are of high value and by law should be protected by Hedgerow Regulation 1997. 5 are ecologically important. One of them is stretching across the whole site. These are well functioning, but within the plan will be destroyed and replaced by a greenway. With removal of these, 8 mature trees will go. Report also say that about 64% it will be 64% increase of hedgerows. That may be true as a number, but in reality, we would need to wait 140 years to have the same quality hedgerows. It also say changes will represent 44% of habitat loss. Access Ecology in their report
30 seconds.
There is no mitigation for habitat loss. They also say that some effects of development can be mitigated, but not some of the most important ones from the ecological perspective. 397 properties will bring in average 2 cars for each unit, plus company cars and visitors' cars. Air quality in Killamarsh is poor to proximity to the...
That's time, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Speaker? Thank you very much.
I have a question.
I'm sorry, procedurally we can't allow that.
Okay, thank you.
Right, well, we now have a 6th group. These are representing the applicant. Just to explain, there is only one speaker on the face of it. However, there are other representatives of the applicant here who are willing to reply to any questions we have of any technical or other nature. There is a precedent for this and it is permissible. So that's the way we will move forward. So can I ask then the representative of the Harworth Group, Joanne Neville. As everyone else, you have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. I am Joanne Neville and I'm the Regional Head of Planning at Harworth Group. Harworth are the applicant for this scheme, and together with 3 other landowners, we control all of the land which makes up the site at Killamarsh. We have tried to work collaboratively with the council since 2013 to promote the site through the planning process, and we secured an allocation on the site last year. This included public consultation with the local community and other key stakeholders. In 2018, to support the examination of the plan, we submitted our planning application to help demonstrate that the site is a deliverable, large-scale housing site capable of accommodating up to 397 new homes. We have followed the proper planning process and chosen to work with the council and wait for the plan to be adopted and an allocation secured prior to the application being brought before committee to seek a decision. We've worked closely with the council's officers to show how the new homes can be accommodated on the site. Last summer, at the request of the council, we underwent an external design review of our scheme, where a panel of design experts visited the site, made comments on our scheme, and this culminated in the scheme before you today. It includes a range of house types and a density of development that reflects the local characteristics of the area. It integrates open space and drainage and creates 6 hectares of on-site public open space and 2 kilometres of additional pedestrian and cycle connections. I appreciate that there is still local opposition to the principle of development on this site, but the council has had to address its future housing need and has concluded through its plan-making process that Killamarsh is an appropriate, sustainable location for a development of this scale. We've worked hard with the council and other consultees to mitigate the impacts of the development and demonstrate that there are no outstanding technical challenges to the delivery of the site. This is evidenced in the committee report with no objections from the council's statutory and technical consultees. Throughout the examination of the plan, we sought to ensure that our scheme was policy compliant, and today we're delivering what we said we would in a policy compliant allocated housing site, delivering 20% affordable housing and contributions towards education, health and sport provision. The officers have provided a comprehensive report which addresses in detail all the material considerations and recommends that planning permission be granted. If the application is successful today,
30 seconds.
We will progress marketing the site for sale with a full technical pack, and we would expect to conclude a sale by the end of the year. This means that a full range of house types, including affordable housing, would commence delivery during 2023. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Have any members any questions? Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you've heard a lot of the things that have been stated through the afternoon, and we've got photographic evidence of some of them. There's several. I'm not going to hog the whole thing. I'm sure other people have got questions to ask. But one of the key things that strikes me is for a development of the sites that you're proposing, the access from the other roads is just totally insufficient. Excuse me, it's totally insufficient. These roads aren't built for that kind of purpose. And one of the things I'm really struggling to get my head around is how you are going to get the let's call it 400 because ultimately that's what it is. How are you going to get the traffic for 400 houses down these narrow country roads, which is effectively what they are? And without that, I don't see how the development's sustainable at all.
Well, our application was underpinned by a robust transport assessment, which did actually assess 400 homes. And we've heard today about concerns about traffic and capacity. We're proposing 3 access points, 1 from Green Lane and 2 on Upperthorpe Road. Those points have all been determined based on speed surveys so that visibility is appropriate. Following public consultation comments, we've extended the width of the Green Lane access so that the highway will become 7 metres wide. That allows for people to park down the side. Our assessments were based on 2017 trip generations, which was agreed with the local highway authority. That is underpinned by DFT guidance that says that's appropriate to do so. And that takes into account all the developments that are happening in the locality. So it picks up comments that people have made about schemes in Bolsover and Rotherham, for example. If we looked at it today, post-COVID, flows different to probably what you would look at in 2017, because the AM and the PM peak were true peaks, whereas now it's a spread. And the local highway authority agree with everything and support the application subject to conditions.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if you could just comment on this one for me. It says the site should be at a capacity of 330. That's the starting point, I guess. But you've gone 397. If you'd done the extra 67 less, would you have been able to put the attenuation ponds on that site and not into Greenbelt?
I think in our view, the 330 is a starting point for housing number. The national planning policy says it's a minimum, they're not maximum figures. And your own local plan talks about density of development that's appropriate. So we've been through an external design review as well to give some comfort that the density, whilst it's higher than the figure in the local plan, I think with 2 dwellings a hectare higher, it's still appropriate given the mix and the characteristics of the area. Design review actually commented that to the north of the site, we could possibly be a bit more dense with density reducing to the south. And in terms of putting the balancing ponds in the Greenbelt, again, this is being tested through national policy and case law. National policy guides that it's appropriate to put drainage basins in the Greenbelt. It's been tested at appeal as well, that drainage basins work in the Greenbelt. The site has now, it's an allocated housing site. So in our view, the 397 is making efficient and good use of a very sustainable site.
Thanks for that, and thanks for letting me know that it's been tested at appeal.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that. My question's around 106 monies and what's been mentioned by highways and what they think would be suitable measures for addressing the traffic concerns. And if we look at what's in our page 18, we've got at the bottom of there, it says about introducing these different measures, including not just the travel plan, but altering, although we got it mixed up on our figures, altering the roundabout and also introducing traffic signals. So they said that those are the measures. Now, when you look at what normally pays for those, and you'll be more aware of this than I am, normally that sort of infrastructure is, because what we don't have in our area, what's the agreement we don't have?
Sale.
Sorry?
Sale.
That's it. We don't have that. So anything would have to come out of the 106 monies. And that's what they've said. Now, my concern is when you look at the 106 monies that we've got at the back on page 35, it all adds up to around about 670,000. Yeah. So that's the 106 monies, which goes health, educational, libraries, and the rest is sports and travel plan monitoring costs. Now, there's nothing there which is currently being pushed towards or suggested that pays for these infrastructure changes. So these traffic lights, the change to the roundabouts, possible road widening, really big infrastructure things that will affect Killamarsh. My concern is who's paying for this? For this to be sustainable, it's who's paying for it. Now, for me, it looks like the taxpayer is paying for it. Your company, rightly so, and like it should be, or your company that you represent should be making profits. Absolutely, completely with that. However, it's who pays for this, which makes it begs the question, is it sustainable? When all these things need doing for you to be able to build these 397 or 330. So it's about, my question is about sustainability. Give me a view on that. Who pays for all these that have been suggested? Thank you.
So we've got a full suite of Section 106, so 20% affordable, contributions towards education, health, sport, libraries, I think travel monitoring. And then in the conditions, we'll accept a condition about the Bridge Street, Sheffield Road junction. We will have to put that in, and we will put that in with the Highway Authority under a Section 278 or Section 38 agreement. So we will fund that, but it will be a separate agreement like a 106 that just sits in its back, the condition that is there to make sure it goes in, but we will pay for that. Similarly, with the white lining changes on the roundabout of the Walford Road, Sheffield Road junction, we will pay for that. That will be done under Section 278, Section 38. And similarly with the Green Road, Green Lane widening to 7 metres, it's in our gift to do that because it's within our land ownership, but we will extend the highway and we will pay for that as well, to Section 38 and Section 278.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions from members? Thank you very much. Right, we now move to the next section of the meeting where members will now have the opportunity to put questions to officers about the application. Can I just say that I would like to keep this part of the meeting or our proceedings focused on getting clarity about any points you are not sure of. Once we've done that, we can then have our own discussion about the application itself based on what we have heard and we have read. I would be grateful if you could not move any motions in this part of the meeting at this stage. Let's wait until we've all had a chance to make our assessment with our questions to officers. So, any questions to officers? I'll start at the far end with Councillor Liggett.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. The first one to officers is why they haven't requested an EIA.
As members have heard, Chair, an assessment was done on that following submission of the application, and it was deemed that an EIA wasn't required in this case, and that determination was made by the council to the applicants. So no EIA was required. It wasn't deemed necessary for this scale of development.
I find that slightly worrying, Adrian, especially with mine shafts and methane and hedgerows and wildlife.
Chair, there is a formal process that was gone through by the council, by council officers, and that assessment was made based on the criteria set out in the relevant regulations and a determination made at that point.
Thank you. My next question is, I think it's probably a new term that officers are probably not even conversant of yet, but at Natural England, water neutrality. Apparently, within the next 20 years, we're going to have severe water shortages in this clean drinking water, equivalent to a Lady Bower's worth of water per week more needed in this country. And I just wondered if you can class this as a feasible development. Can you guarantee that it's not going to reduce the water supply to this local area?
Chair, I'm not in a position to make comment on that. I don't know the circumstances of the case nor the issues that Councillor Liggett has referred to. As officers, we've sought in our report, Chair, to address as we sit and reflect on all the relevant material matters, and predominant of those is the allocation of the site, Chair, in your local plan for residential development. So that's the starting point that we had, and the adoption of the plan about 6 months ago. So that's the basis of our assessment, and all the matters surrounding this site and the issues that Councillor Liggett and others, and we've heard discussed this afternoon, will have been taken into account. The inspector made her decision on the allocation, but in specific reference to that question, Chair, it's not an issue that's been raised in this circumstance nor in representations to us, nor by any of the statutory consultees in respect of water provision. Indeed, the water provider has not raised any objections subject to the protection of their sewer that I believe crosses the site. So that's the only comment we've had back from the statutory deliverer.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, I wonder if you could just let me know about this one. Air quality. I'm talking about air quality. You've got a motorway that's been put down to 4 lanes and slowed down to 50 mile an hour for travelling through to prevent or to help the air quality. Yet we're pushing for probably or potentially 800 or more movements a day with vehicles on this new thing, not so many miles away from that motorway. Can you comment on that one for me, please? And at 722A, we're talking about a swept path auto track where the highway authority differ and the applicant differs to what size vehicle has been used to test the paths for larger vehicles. The applicant obviously would consider the swept path acceptable, but again, it remains as a final discussion. And noted that no objections been raised by our own council street scene team. Could you comment on those two, please?
Just taking the first point first, Chair. The issue of air quality has been assessed by the environmental health officer, and in their response to us at 7.31 in the officer report, comments made on that, Chair. And particularly, I'd ask members to note that the MPPF in its advice says that the matter of air quality is properly addressed at the plan making stage. So again, Chair, that would be an issue that was properly addressed at the plan making stage by the inspector in the local plan inquiry. Just on the second element, Chair, the issue of the specific swept path analysis hasn't been finalised, and therefore it's reserved in the condition. Forgive me, I don't know the specific number, but it's reserved both in condition to be required to meet the relevant, it's the waste vehicle size in effect that's dictating the swept path analysis. So that will need to be addressed when the actual delivery of the roads through the reserve matter stage is submitted. And then that can also be conditioned and retained, as you've heard this afternoon, by specific agreement with the Highway Authority under, I'm not sure if it's section 38 or 278, but in terms of the delivery of the new road network. So as officers, we don't believe that's a technical issue why you couldn't grant permission this afternoon for this scheme. You retain control over that.
It's just that I look at 731, Adrian, and I had started when I was reading it last night. 731, the AHO, really, how can they say that it's improving air quality, having another 800 movements a day? I don't get that one.
I'm not here, Chair, to say that the delivery event will necessarily improve air quality. I'm not able to say that. All I'm able to say is that the advice we have is that air quality is not considered overriding by our advisor on that. And indeed, was your advice in the MPPF is that should have been properly addressed at the plan making stage. So not an issue that should derail you from making a decision on the application this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Adrian.
Any more questions? Yeah, Councillor Foster, and then Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kirkham, for that. First question I've got is about DCC and their response, and I'm looking at page 18. We've got at the bottom of there, clarity is sought about the level of development proposed. It's a bit worrying that that's there from DCC. I don't know if that means they're not sure how many houses are going to be built there, or so a bit of clarity on that. Clarity is sought as to the level of development proposed. That's from Highways. Also, confirmation that the impact on the 618 Sheffield Road mini roundabout is not significant. So they're wanting confirmation from someone else. So that's a concern, that paragraph there. And probably the last question on Highways is about the traffic assessment. If we look at the accompanying documents, well, online they are, the letter from DCC 14th of Jan and 11th of May, they both refer to a transport assessment. So my question is, there's no reference there to who's done the transport assessment, but I could find it. So that's my first question regarding Highways. Thank you.
Just on those, Chair, I'm not here to speak for the County Council in terms of the level of development proposed and their seemingly inability to understand that. But first of all, I'm satisfied that the Highway Authority are aware of the level of development that's proposed, and that their assessment's been based on the submission, Chair, for the 397 dwellings and the transport assessment that's been submitted. They have, I'm personally aware that they've sought advice from colleagues or our contact has sought advice from colleagues on the various elements. And that is what's led to the delivery of the recommended conditions as per the updates pack, Chair. So in short, the Highway Authority have confirmed that there's no objection to the scheme subject to the various conditions. Just in terms of the mini roundabout, I think it's the one that's referred to that we got wrong as officers in our recommended conditions. It's the one at the junction of Walford Road and Sheffield Road. And I apologise for that, Chair, but there is some relining of that roundabout just to make sure that roundabout is can accommodate the level of traffic. And there isn't a small element of engineering works that would accompany that. But fundamentally, that roundabout will, in conjunction with the traffic signalling that you've heard also talked about this afternoon, that would address any concerns that the Highway Authority has with regards to road impacts. And finally, Councillor Foster mentioned the issue of the transport assessment. That's been submitted by the applicant and has been assessed and evaluated by the Highway Authority in their responses to us. And yes, the final elements have only in the past few days been addressed, but I have had significant correspondence with the Highway Authority over the past few days to finalise the wording of the conditions. And I can advise members that subject to those conditions and the mitigation that you've heard, the Highway Authority are satisfied from their point of view that the scheme is acceptable.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kirkham. I've got other questions, but on that, just it does concern me though when you look at the statements that are in there. Clarity sorts the level of development proposed. If it's being sorted, you know. Anyway, I'll move on. The other one is about on page 1718, the archaeology, and it says at the bottom of page 17, DCC archaeology, the position remains as it was in 2018. The application does not meet the heritage information requirement, paragraph 194 NPPF. So could we have a bit of a, I'm sure it's been sorted since, and it's probably in the late comments, although the late comments are quite large, and because I've been here and this is the first time I've seen them, I'm sure like many others, I haven't had a chance to read through these. So if it's in there, please excuse me. But just a bit of an explanation on that it does not meet the heritage information requirement as per paragraph 194, which I've got somewhere.
Yeah, again, just on that, Chair, it's a matter that's been addressed late on in the day, again, in the past few days, and it's the first comment in the late updates comment with regards to the final comments of the DCC archaeologist, and the conditions that are recommended relate, I believe, to condition 19 that's recommended again in the pack. That does require the delivery of the written scheme of investigation to follow the submission made in March 2020, and there's an element of that needs to be carried out in addition earlier rather than later, just to address that final element. But the DCC archaeologist is happy that that can be dealt with through a submitted written scheme of investigation. As I say, that's condition 19 of the pack.
Thank you for that. One last question, Chair. I can give way to Councillor Elliott if you like.
No, you finish off, Councillor Foster, and then it's Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. My question, I mentioned earlier, you might have heard me speak to Mr. Warnes earlier when I asked him the question about the Coal Authority. When we look at the documents we've got on file, I'm sure it's changed in the last couple of days, we talk about the 6 recorded mine entries, 5 of which are shafts. 4 have been found, and there's a 5th one that can't be found, but it says in the mining report, which is still from the documents online, this is still valid, and it's yet to be located and likely to be present. That's what's on page 2 of the Coal Authority, 8th of November 2018. They then updated it when we asked for an update from them. I've got a letter somewhere, but it's been updated, I think December. Yeah, 21st December 2021. So have you got any news on that, please?
That's still as you read it, Chair. The recommended condition number 5 addresses that, and the Coal Authority are satisfied with a scheme of intrusive site investigations to locate that mine entry. and then implement any mitigation needed to address it and the other elements that are set out in the submitted report. The Coal Authority are recommending, again, subject to that condition, that again, that's not a matter that would preclude you granting consent for the scheme this afternoon, Chair.
Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. Could you tell me, Adrian, do we really need all these houses to bring us up to the required number? Bearing in mind that if we go around the region, our area, there are developments springing up all over the place. And have we got our required quota of houses for this area, or are we going in excess of what we need?
The site, Chair, it's an issue I've mentioned a few times already. The site is allocated in your recently adopted local plan for residential development. So what the council is saying in that allocation is that the principle of residential development on the site is acceptable. And you'll have seen, and you've heard this afternoon, that an approximate level of dwellings for this site in your local plan is 330. And that's to meet the minimum levels of housing needs. That's 6,600 in the local plan. So that element of this site is to meet that requirement. However, Chair, as with all these things, the numbers that are set out and within the local plan are not minimum numbers. And there's no reason why, subject to all the other considerations and assessment of those at a reserve matter stage, that with a suitable design, 397 houses couldn't be accommodated on the site, subject to those criteria. So in terms of meeting your minimum requirements, this site has been allocated to provide 330 dwellings of that. But there's no reason, as we set out in the report, there's no reason why a larger number couldn't be accommodated, particularly as the submissions made and the comments made on them by the statutory consultees have assessed that, in their opinion, subject to condition, that there's no reason why that larger number couldn't be accommodated here.
So in actual fact, the 397 is, what shall I say? It could easily be, you could put 500 houses on.
If you thought, Chair, that that was an appropriate number, they could be accommodated on the site acceptably in terms of their design and in terms of all the other elements that you've heard discussed this afternoon, all the technical elements, yes, that would be appropriate if you thought that was an acceptable number. The submission's been made predicated on 397, and the submissions made have sought to evaluate that and show the acceptability of that number on this site, which is why it's made in those terms.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, can you just tell me what you think of this one as well? Drainage and flood risk on page 31, 733. Sites located outside flood zone 2 and 3, so not in an area liable to flood. I'll just refer you to one of the speakers' late comment photos, page 20, 21, 22, 23. Not liable to flood.
I don't know the circumstances of those photographs, Chair. They've been submitted, and in terms of providing members with all the full information, we've put them in the pack. But I can't tell you why, in what circumstances that situation was delivered or how it happened. I don't know about that. All I can advise you again is that the issue of what's in the photographs is an existing situation. So that's maybe happening now for whatever reason. But again, we often have the discussion at committee about a future development should properly address its own surface water runoff. And that's what, in this instance, the submissions have shown, and the provision of the attenuation ponds we are advised would deliver. So the housing on the site should not make any existing situation worse. In fact, they may regulate runoff better than the existing.
We as a planning committee had this exact same thing on Clay Lane and still been dealing with it. And the attenuation ponds were put in as a good gesture afterwards. We still don't know whether that's going to do what it should do. And this says this is the the surface water will be primarily be dealt with by the attenuation ponds. What else is suggested then if this is only primarily dealt with?
The overall drainage strategy, Chair, has been shown to accommodate the modelling has been shown to accommodate what would be the runoff of the site. There would be various other mechanisms. There's areas of open space that are left on the site that would, of course, take some of the surface water through soakaway as well. But in terms of the runoff that would come off roofs and hard surfacing, there is a different runoff rate. You know this, I've no need to tell you this. But just in terms of, I know we're talking about other sites, but again, members will have heard me say this before, you need to consider this application on its merits. And again, the advice we have from the technical consultee here, that the local flood authority, is that the scheme can accommodate its surface water without detriment.
Are there any other questions for officers? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, my main concerns about the emission of gases and the fact that we do not know where this other mine shaft is. Now, my house is built on an area where there's a lot of mining. And when we look at our deeds pack, there's loads of information from the National Coal Board. And I wonder if in their archives there's answers to where these actually seams are and these mine shafts. And shouldn't we really be investigating it more just to make sure that everybody involved is safe, including the people of Killamarsh?
Chair, that's exactly what the Coal Authority have recommended in their condition, and the recommended condition of the Coal Authority is as recommended by officers, so that that safeguard can be provided, Chair, so that the mine shaft that hasn't yet been found will be found, and any remediation of that and the rest of the site can be accommodated safely. So again, the advice we're getting from the statutory consultee in this instance is saying that with that condition, they are satisfied that any residual land stability can be addressed properly in the way that has been suggested, Chair.
Any other questions for officers? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, could you, one of the previous speakers, I know we've had a lot of them, mentioned about contaminants. Could you appraise the committee of what's happening with that once they start scraping the ground, please?
Again, Chair, the comments of the Environmental Health Officer has addressed that particular point, and there are again recommended conditions that would address any residual land contamination, and they're again set out in the report. So again, that would be safeguarded as per the coal issues, the residual land stability issues.
Thank you, Adrian.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kirkham, my concerns are still around the amount of houses that are on there. The 397 as opposed to what was put forward in the local plan, the 330. And when I read page 27 under 7.1 of the pike, it says there, I'll let people catch up if they want to follow what I'm saying. The allocated local plan yield of 330 dwellings is based on a starting calculation, absolutely true, but a flexible approach is advocated in the local plan. Now, it doesn't say that it's advocated in the local plan, page 142, 8.58, it says it supports it, which is for me, it's slightly different. It's a turn of phrase, and these can all be interpreted, but that's what we're here to do, interpret these words and interpret these policies and provide different weight to different policies. So for me, I'm concerned about that it's mentioned there, that it's advocated as opposed to support. With the characteristics of the site and surrounding area, determining the appropriate density, it's actually the most appropriate density. So I've got concerns in how it's being put forward. And it's not a statement, it's a question, Chair, and I'd happily hear the answer. It also mentions about where there's good access to frequent public transport services as per policy SDC 12H. And we've heard from many people already, many people that know Killamarsh, that you don't have good access to frequent public transport services at all. So that's my concern around the 330 being pushed over to 397. It's also mentioned in the MPPF 2, and this is when we're talking about efficient use of land. It's not necessarily what's efficient use of land, it's what's appropriate, which for me is much more important. And if we look at
Councillor Foster, we're getting into a bit of debate here. Can you have some clarity about?
I'll leave it at that. I'll wait for her answer, Chair.
Well, I was going to suggest that you could tell us what your questions were for the benefit of Mr. Kirkham.
I'd like a comment from Mr. Kirkham on that. It's about the 330 to the 397.
The local plan, Chair, again, I come back to this headline point, I guess, that the local plan has allocated the site for residential development, and the number set out in the local plan is an approximate number. Then, as Councillor Foster says, there's other considerations in the plan, and if the wording that I've put in the report is not exactly that in the local plan, Chair, I apologise, but certainly the way that you've heard, and members will have read the report, and you've heard Councillor Foster, the issue to my mind is still the same, that 330 isn't a fixed number, and that it needs to be then taken a step further as to what the site or a site can accommodate appropriately, and that is, as you've heard Councillor Foster say, that's based on the specifics of the site and how the site may accommodate dwellings. So the density is the starting point, that isn't the finishing point. That's the wording of the local plan. So you need to make that assessment. In this instance, as you've heard, the site has been subject to consideration by a design review panel. They didn't come forward with any suggestion that 397 wouldn't be appropriately accommodated. And as Councillor Foster says, the efficient use of sites is advocated, my words, but advocated by government to secure a good use of land. And in this case, the conditions that are proposed would safeguard levels of open space on the site that would at least match what's required in the local plan. And so again, from an office point of view, we can't see any good reason why 397 dwellings couldn't be accommodated appropriately on the site. That will be subject to your consideration, if appropriate, of any reserve matters application and how that would be delivered. Just in terms of the issue of sustainability, the local plan is predicated on producing sustainable development or providing sustainable development. And that would have been one of the salient considerations in the consideration of the inspector at the inquiry, and also then in the adoption of the plan by the council itself. So in terms of the issue of sustainability, Killarmarsh is one of the most sustainable settlements in the district, one of the four most sustainable settlements in the district. It has levels of amenity and services that aren't replicated in the smaller villages and settlements. Therefore, your plan was based on that headline assessment that delivery of new development would be concentrated on those four settlements. So I would ask members to bear that in mind in making your decision this afternoon, and that Killarmarsh is one of those four settlements, so should provide sustainable development. And that's been evidenced by the delivery of this site as one of your allocations in the local plan.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Kirkham. We now come to the debate, when members have the opportunity to give a view of what they have heard, what they have seen. Before we do that, though, I'd just like the clerk to remind us about motions. As I say, this is the debate. Motions come later, but I will ask the clerk to explain.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Please bear in mind, members, that a motion must be moved and seconded before a vote is taken. If an amendment to a motion is moved and seconded, then that amendment will be voted on first. If a motion is to be moved which goes against the officer recommendations, then the member who has moved the motion must give the reasons for doing so. The reasons for moving a motion against officer recommendations should comprise the relevant planning issues and be supported by the evidence as necessary. If a motion to reject officer recommendations falls, or in other words, it is not passed, That doesn't mean that the recommendations are automatically approved. Rather, you will need to take a positive decision through a further motion in favour of the recommendations or a different course of action. This will need to be approved by the committee through another vote. Now, in terms of the timing of motions, these should be moved and seconded after the committee has heard, read and discussed the evidence before it. The chair will indicate when this point has been reached and will then invite motions to be put. Members will be reminded of this by the clerk if they wish to propose a motion before then. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, I'm now opening the floor for debate. Councillor Armitage.
Thank you, Chair. This is a difficult one. We've looked at everything on it. There are loads of reasons for turning it down. And we've got things like methane gas. There are a number of mine shafts, and there are also small ones that are not recorded. The ground is, I would consider, generally unstable. We've got the loss of the landscape. I mean, it's the impact on the landscape. The ground rises up, and as far as I can see, this development will stick out like a sore thumb. You'll be able to see it from miles around. We've also got the housing density. That's bigger than we were going to originally have. And then something that linked to the impact on the landscape and the flora and fauna, we've got the impact on the listed buildings, which are all around the area. There's, I think, 3 different lots. And then we've got the loss of the 5 public footpaths. All right, so we're going to reroute them and all the rest of it. And then we've got the fact that we've got ancient hedges, and it doesn't matter what happens with those. Once they're ripped out, they're gone for good, and they'll take probably 100 years for them to be reformed and for the actual flora and fauna to be replaced. And here we are saying, oh, well, let's plant some trees, and here we are ripping them all out. And to me, I just can't go along with this plan whatsoever.
Thank you, Councillor Armitage. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. My concerns are the one we just discussed, and I won't go over the points again. My concerns are to the committee is that it exceeds the figure in the local plan, and I've given the reasons why. We don't have to go to 397. We can stick to 330. We can do that. It's in our local plan. That's up to us as a committee. Number 2, the attenuation pond in the Greenbelt. I don't believe this meets the exceptional circumstances set out in the local plan at all. Or paragraph 147 of the NPPF, development not to be approved except in very special circumstances, slightly different. I also don't agree that it's more difficult when it comes to the highways because of all the things that have been discussed and mentioned. But from my view, it's a very, very busy place already, Killamarsh. The roads are packed all the time. I've got little faith in that transport report, that transport assessment, very little faith in that. So for me, the only place we can go on this when we look at what policies we could possibly look at is policy ID3, sustainable travel. The only way is to say it is the cumulative impact would be severe. That's the only place we've got. And I'm sure we'll receive some advice on that. That's where I think it starts. It would be severe. We know that anybody that travels through Killamarsh, unfortunately, I do travel through Killamarsh to work. I don't say that for Killamarsh, but unfortunately, but yeah, I do travel through there. I know how busy it is through there. It's packed. And this is going to be, when we look at the number of residents which are going to be living there, we're looking at 600-700 cars. It's going to be much worse. So for me, it is sustainable travel, and it is number 4. And the last one, and my last concern is which is the mining one, which we've discussed a few times now, and it's about these mine shafts, which we don't know where they are. that they are there, and we're not sure. I'm not sure about the gas. That I don't know, because I'm not an expert in that. But from what I know about the mine shafts and the instability of the land, I'm happy to say that we shouldn't be approving this based on local plan policy SD 14, where development proposals will not be permitted unless it can be demonstrated that any land potentially affected by contamination or instability. So it's potentially affected. So those are my concerns to the committee, those four. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with both Bill and Mark in a lot of what's been said here. I respect totally what Adrian's saying about we've got conditions to address multiple things, but I'm actually struggling to see how this development at all is sustainable at any level, even at the 330. I take fully on board what Carolyn said earlier when as environment portfolio at holder at Derbyshire County Council, that we can't give too much credence to the reports that have come from there, and we've got photographic evidence which shows us that the roads which will lead into this estate are too narrow. We've got evidence of flooding, which one councillor actually told us happens a couple of times a year. So irrespective of whether the development itself addresses these problems or what it brings, these problems already exist and actually make access to the site very difficult, if not totally impossible at certain times of the year. As Mark says, there's a huge question mark over this whole contamination and instability issue. And could any of us sit here in good conscience and allow people to move into houses that's on land that's dodgy to start with? I don't drive, so I know exactly what Killamarsh's sustainable travel's like on public transport. And when we were having meetings up there, it was atrocious. So it falls down completely on ID3. But as I say, for me, that none of the I actually look from the visuals that we've got, and yes, I can understand where they're kind of coming and saying, yes, this space could accommodate the 397, and I'm sure it could, and with a great designer, yes, it can. The reality is Killamarsh can't sustain that. And even if you were to, that plot of land, the size of land is fine, yes, it would work, but where it is doesn't, and none of it to me is sustainable to meet our own local plan.
Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Councillor Hartshorn.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in fact, what Councillor Foster mentioned earlier, that was top of my list, ID3, sustainable travel. I think it's a real problem. I think those roads are too narrow, if I'm honest, to take the volume of traffic that will be travelling from that site. And from what we've heard from local residents, I think we also ought to consider the infrastructure side of it, ID1, because it is that people are already struggling at the doctors' surgeries. Got the schooling issues, and I know there's going to be some contribution, but whether that will meet the requirement that's going to come from this, I'm not convinced. And the other one that I slightly highlighted was the ID8, which was greenways and the movement of the footpaths and what have you. So that's my view. I think I'm finding it difficult. I know we've got to find a place for all these houses. We've been given this task to locate somewhere to put all the houses in this district, 6,600 houses, and it's been a difficult task, but I'm not convinced this is the right location. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hartshorn. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've heard what my colleagues have said, and I completely agree with all of it. I'm not going to reiterate what I said about the air quality, but I will reiterate about the vehicle movements backwards and forwards. Killamarsh won't sustain that. I drive into Killamarsh 4 times a week to the surgeries. I'm not entirely sure that the doctors, the dentists, and the schools can actually accommodate the amount of people that are going to move into them. So, and again, I agree with my colleagues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment, really, and I'll start off by saying I have got the full respect for the officers and obviously putting the papers together and all the background work. But it's our job as a committee to listen to the objections and take on board what people have said locally, which we've done. How long we've been at it. But there's been enough concerns been raised in my head. I'm struggling to support what's in here. There's too many gaps in it from where I can pick out. I'm not conversant with some of these figures, the ID3 and SP14, but if somebody else can come up with let's say a motion that captures them, then that's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Anyone else? Right, so that concludes the debate. So we now move on to the next section of the meeting when I will open the floor for motions. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose a motion that we reject.
Sorry, can I interrupt you, Councillor Foster? I did say to Mr. Kirkham that he wanted to say something before we do that.
Oh, my apologies.
No, it's my mistake. My mistake, no problem.
I hear the comments that members make around the table, Chair. Members will need to take a view on the application in a few minutes' time. I'd just like to reiterate in making that decision that members take into account the recently adopted local plan and the allocation of the site for housing in that plan. I accept and note the comments made about the numbers, but ask members to weigh very carefully the allocation in your local plan and your legal responsibility to take your decision in accordance with your local plan unless material considerations indicate and dictate otherwise. So that's your legal responsibility. In this instance, the site is allocated in your local plan for residential development, and so that needs to be a significant issue in your consideration. We've just discussed at some length a number of technical issues, and again, I note members' comments on that, and you'll need to weigh those in the balance. But I'd just like to reiterate, Chair, that in terms of the consultee responses that you've had and the information before you, there is, in an officer opinion, no evidence that I've heard this afternoon that would lead me to go against the advice of those consultees. So again, you need to weigh that very carefully in the balance. And if you're minded to refuse the application, what evidence are you placing on any evidence and information that would lead you to conclusions to resist the application on any of those technical elements, Chair? And just the final point, that as officers we've set out in our advice to members the conditions that we believe could control all these elements, and certainly some of the elements that have been put forward, hedgerows, for example, and the design of the houses and the roads and the footpaths, I believe could be addressed through your consideration of any reserved matters application in any case. You would still retain control over those elements. So in short, Chair, just ask members to consider very carefully the legal responsibility you have this afternoon, the development plan that was adopted last November and the allocation of the site in that, and the comments that you've received from the various consultees and their view on the application, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to make those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkham. Right. Sorry, Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me while I work through this. Yeah, I'd like to propose that we reject officers' recommendations and reject this proposal for planning permission at this site for the reasons which I've spoken about already. I've given some of the appropriate policies already, but I'm happy to go through them again, Mr. Kirkham. One is the first one is that it exceeds the figure in the local plan, and also mentioning there good access to frequent public transport services policy, SDC 12 bracketed H, that there isn't good access to public transport. Also that we follow our local plan. Number two, the attenuation pond is in the green belt. I don't believe this meets the exceptional circumstances as in the set out in the local plan. I believe that's ID 10. Paragraph 147 of the MPPF, development not to be approved except in very special circumstances. That's for the same point for the green belt. And for number three, which, as I said before, is more difficult, but also to reject it on grounds that the traffic's not sustainable, as in ID3. Also, in the planning framework, paragraph 104B. And then lastly, for myself, anyway, because I'd happily take an addition to this. STC 14, development proposals will not be printed unless it can be demonstrated that any land potentially affected by contamination or instability. So that one there, that's about the mining and the mine shafts, especially the one that we don't know about. Also, Councillor Hartshorn has mentioned ID1 and ID8. I'd happily hear from Councillor Hartshorn if he wants to add those to my proposal, if I'm allowed to do that, Chair.
Yes, you will. Councillor Hartshorn, do you want to respond to Councillor Foster?
Yeah, I mentioned RD1 infrastructure delivery and developer contributions. I'm not convinced that the plan meets that those requirements, especially under these circumstances at the moment, with the clear problems with the doctor's surgeries and schooling. And ID8, which is the public rights of way that are going to be affected throughout the site and altered. I understand that there is going to be some movement on these, but at the end of the day, there is some issues raised by the I can't remember what they're called now, the people who deal with the footpaths.
Thank you.
No, the Ramblers, isn't it? Is it the Ramblers? Yeah.
Councillor Foster, are you willing to accept those additions to your motion?
Absolutely, Chair. And just before we have a second, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Just before somebody hopefully seconds that proposal, just before, and we take a vote, what I'd like to add to it is a big concern of mine is the traffic here. And it's very difficult to get around that traffic issue, absolutely. And when we look at what evidence has been put forward from the traffic, it's been provided by the developer, not by highways, not by objectors, not by the parish council. So what I'd like to do is, if this is to stand up in future, because this is not the end of it, I'm sure. If this is to stand up in future, we need some more information so that we can take, for me, a better view on this, rather than just receiving one story as regards what's happening to the traffic. We've heard from everybody that lives there how bad it is, and I know myself, but we've heard a different story when it came to some of the information we received. Thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. How do we have?
I'll second it.
We have a seconder with Councillor Armitage. Councillor Hancock.
I was going to second, Chair, and provide the basis for the contradicting evidence that Adrian was requesting. We've had the Environment Cabinet member here actually saying that the information that Derbyshire County Council has provided is out of date. Planning law does permit eyewitness evidence, and it does permit photographic evidence. We've got them there. They prove that flooding has taken place. We can see with our own eyes that those roads are not sufficient to actually accommodate the traffic there. That would hold up before an inspection, should it be should it be required to do so. So yeah, I can't second cost. Bill's already done it, but fully support what's been said.
Mr. Kirkham is just seeking some clarity.
Yeah, I've just come back to the proposer seconder, Chair, just so we understand exactly as officers the decision that you're about to take a vote on. We've mentioned the issue about the number proposed exceeding the local plan number, and there's policy LC1 that I think Councillor Foster mentioned in respect of that. Then there was the issue about limited access to public transport, SDC 12H, and I just wondered if the issue regarding sustainable travel is related to that, or is that just related to the issue of cumulative impact on the highway network?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it did get confusing at that part. Yes, that is related to the cumulative impact. Absolutely. And the sustainable travel was the third part for ID3.
Yeah, so that may be a highway issue that's bundled together. That's the only point I'm just trying to clarify, Chair. It can be if it's the decision that members take to separate them. That I understand. I just want to be clear.
I'd like them separated, so it's clear that they affect that it affects. That's one of the reasons for it being 330 in the local plan. Absolutely.
And then there was the issue about inappropriate development in the green belt, which is in relation to the attenuation ponds, and Councillor Foster, I think, mentioned ID 10 and the MPPF paragraphs, but there's also the council's own policies in respect of green belt impact. Then I'm clear on the issue of land contamination instability, Chair. That's SDC 14. And then the issue that Councillor Foster made again, maybe with Councillor Hartshorn as well, about not meeting the mitigation that you would be looking for. That's policy ID 1. And then the issue about the public rights of way affected. Again, are you wishing those to be put together or to be divorced? So there's those 6 elements, Chair, and I think I'm clear now, but my recommendation again would be that the final wording of that is delegated to myself in consultation with yourself, Chair.
Do you need a moment just to confer with the clerk about all those?
Adrian, can we separate those, actually, the ID 1 and ID 8, please?
Yes, if that's what the committee wishes to do, that would make seven individual reasons.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I just want to be absolutely clear, Chair, if the decision is taken to review the application, we've got it absolutely right. That's the reason I asked. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Right, we have a motion and we have a seconder. I'll now ask the clerk to read out the motion.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As I understand it, then it is to refuse planning permission against officer recommendations for the reasons which have just been iterated there, which are essentially about the density of the development exceeding the land, or rather the housing figure within the local plan. And there was the issues then about the lack of good transport links, public transport links, which already exist. Issues then about inappropriate development within the green belt, and in particular the attenuation tanks. Increase in traffic, which makes it not actually a sustainable development. I think that was one of the issues which you were concerned about. There was also the issue about potential contamination of the land, given the fact that there are issues about the sort of mine workings which are unknown. There was also concerns then about whether the infrastructure funding or package or amelioration would be sufficient. And then issues also then about the impact on public rights of way and generally the environment in that sense. Have I captured the essence of it there, members?
Check through the
Councillor
chair.
Foster,
Yeah, also, as well as contamination, instability. I think that's
And instability, indeed.
Councillor Foster and Councillor Armitage, as mover and seconder, are you happy with that summary of the motion? In that case, we'll move to the vote, which will be by roll call.
Right, thank you, Chair. Councillor Armitage.
For.
Councillor Barker.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
Abstain.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Hall.
For.
Councillor Hancock.
For.
Councillor Hartshorn.
For.
Councillor Liggett.
For.
Councillor Jones. Councillor Powell.
As chair, I will choose to abstain.
And Councillor Rouse.
Or I'll put me back.
That was 4. 10 for, Chair, and 2 abstentions. The motion has passed.
Thank you. We come to item 6, which is urgent business. I have no urgent business, so I can now declare that the meeting is closed. Thank you for your attendance and your attention. It's been a bit of a marathon, but thank you for your courtesy. Thank you.